Bring in former Florida Congressman and Fox News contributor, Lieutenant Colonel Allen West. Lieutenant Colonel, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Maria. How are you?
You okay? Your reaction to the president's speech?
Look, I think he gave an incredible speech. I went back and re-looked at Barack Obama's speech at Cairo University back in August of 2009 as a point of contrast and comparison. And what we saw was the difference between someone that tried to acquiesce and accommodate and appease with someone that took a very forceful tone. You're not going to go in front of the Saudis and all of these other Muslim nation leaders and start pounding the table. But he talked about denying the Islamic terrorism sanctuary in their countries. He talked about cutting off their flow of resource support and material support. And most importantly, he talked about how you can defeat this ideology and that they need to come on board and do that as well. He did recognize the countries such as Jordan, the UAE, and others that are on the front lines in fighting against this. But he said that there is more that can be done. And he also challenged them about the issue of the refugees, that they're not doing what they should be doing with, harboring more of these refugees in their countries.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point in terms of the refugees. And I want to take you back to the conversation about Iran, Colonel, because even when the leader of Saudi Arabia, the king, was introducing the president, he spoke about Iran. The president spoke about Iran. There was a lot of conversation on the heels of the Iran deal and what this trip means in terms of the unity against Iran.
There's an incredible juxtaposition that is out there because when you look at the preponderance of Islamic terrorism, it's Sunni. But when you look at the great threat of a nation state that is supporting terrorism and also becoming a regional hegemony, that's Iran. And the fact that you had Barack Obama with the Iranian nuclear agreement and sending billions of dollars to Iran, that really did unnerve a lot of those Sunni nations. You know, you have Sunni nations that are part of the Gulf Cooperation Council that have condemned and said that the Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization. We know that al-Sisi in Egypt is fighting against them, but yet we had a previous administration that cut off funding and support to al-Sisi's government in their fight against the Muslim Brotherhood, to include ISIS in the Sinai Peninsula.
Colonel, it's Dagen McDowell. What are you going to be looking for in the days after President Trump returns from this trip? The actions of Saudi Arabia, the actions of Israel, and these other nations that he's clearly reaching out to?
Well, that's the most important thing. I would have held off on this big $330 billion arms deal till I saw more actions coming from Saudi Arabia. And there was something very interesting that Prime Minister Netanyahu said when he talked about how President Trump had flown from Riyadh to Israel, and he looked forward to the day when an Israeli Prime Minister can fly from Tel Aviv to Riyadh. That's a very important step that we should see. The other thing that I think is so important are the actions of the president. You all talked about it earlier, how after that great speech at the joint session of Congress, 4 days later he got on Twitter and he completely changed the conversation, talking about wiretapping of Trump Towers. So we need to see a president that can stay on message, stay engaged, and come back to the United States of America refreshed and strong. But we also need to see the people there in Saudi Arabia, Israel, and it'd be interesting to see what happens with Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinians, because they need to reject the terrorist base that they have in the West Bank themselves.
You know, I'm glad you brought up the deals in terms of the arms deals. I just want to point out the infrastructure money coming from Saudi Arabia as well. One of the top stories in the Journal as well this morning, Saudi Arabia agreeing to commit $20 billion to Blackstone's infrastructure fund, joining a parade of investors in U.S. public works. That's in the Journal this morning. This is something that we are seeing the president talk about in terms of new money coming into the U.S. and how he's connecting jobs, jobs, jobs. Your take on the deals that we're seeing the president do on this international trip?
Well, look, I think
it's... Oh, I'm sorry.
No, please, go.
Go ahead, Mr. Peoples.
No, I would be curious about what you think the president can do to implement these policies. Right now, Paul Ryan had said that he thought tax reform would get accomplished before the summer recess. Now, that's looking unlikely, and hopefully by the end of the year. What should this president do to implement his infrastructure policy and get it through, implement his tax reform policy, get it through, and get his economic stimulus through right now to where it will help him and his fellow Republicans in Congress?
Well, I think it's very important that he shows that he is a leader. He needs to come back. And first and foremost, the military side of me, there is no August recess because we have work that has to be done. And I think the president should make that very clear. The whole purpose of an August recess was back before they had air conditioning in Washington, D.C., because it is built on a swamp. They got plenty of air conditioning up there now, so they can do their work. But I think one of the key things is do the infrastructure plan that gives a one-time repatriation at a lower tax rate, 8 to 10%, for corporations and businesses, so that we can get that trillions of dollars of capital to come back. And the revenues that's generated off of that, those trillions of dollars of capital, can also go toward infrastructure planning and infrastructure building. And so you need to see that happen. And I think you lay that at the feet of the Congress and say, this is what I'm doing. It'd be very hard for the Democrats to stand against that.
I just think it's really interesting that this money from the Saudis are going to go toward infrastructure. The country's public investment fund committing $20 billion to this Blackstone fund, Dagan. What do you think about this? Foreign money increasingly wants to buy up airports and pipelines and other public projects. That's what the Saudis are investing in.
The glass half full is that Trump gets his infrastructure investments without having to put government money to work. The glass half empty is that you have a foreign nation who has not always been our friend putting money into American projects where it raises questions about, do we want a foreign government owning a part of
an airport?
An airport.
Yeah.
So I gave you both sides.
Yeah.
Is there anything, we are a free enterprise system. Is there anything wrong with foreign investment owning some of our infrastructure?
No, well, you can ask CFIUS, Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States.
No, but I mean, like, look, there's a reason that China will not allow certain industries to be bought by foreigners, right? There are certain industries that are deemed off limits. Obviously, this is not the case, and they want to encourage more ownership, foreign as well, of these public projects. We'll take a short break. Lieutenant Colonel Allen West, good to see you, sir. Thank you so much.